Captain Daniel Hayes stood in the dimly lit command center of the human exploration ship, reading the message that had just arrived from the Galactic Council. His hands shook slightly. The mission briefing was simple but disturbing. A planet called Vex 9 had been turned into an arena of death. Thousands of alien creatures were being hunted and killed for profit and entertainment. The Council wanted Daniel to investigate. They wanted to understand what was happening. They did not believe humans could stop it. To them, humans were too new, too weak, too irrelevant. The Council was old and powerful, but they had also become callous. They watched suffering from far away and did nothing. Daniel called his team together. Rebecca Mitchell arrived first, her medical uniform still stained from treating a crew member's injury. She was brilliant and direct, with no patience for bureaucracy or lies. When Daniel showed her the briefing, she read it carefully and then looked up at him. "They want us to go there," she said. It was not a question. "Yes," Daniel replied. "And they do not want us to stop it," Rebecca continued. "They believe we cannot," Daniel said. Lucas Grant came next. He was the ship's chief engineer, a man who could build or repair anything. He was quieter than Rebecca, but his mind never stopped working. When he saw the mission details, he whistled low. "That is a big operation," Lucas said. "Whoever is running this has serious resources and security." Daniel nodded. "The Kreth. They are an ancient species. They have been trading in weapons and technology for thousands of years. Now they profit from this. Then we are walking into a hornet's nest," Lucas said, "with no backup and no permission to interfere." "That is exactly what we are doing," Daniel said. The three of them began preparing the ship. They gathered supplies, weapons, and recording equipment. Daniel made sure they had cloaking technology that would help them stay hidden. They could not fight an open war against the Kreth. They would have to observe, document, and survive. The journey to Vex 9 took 3 days. As they approached the planet, Daniel saw that it was not naturally formed as a death world. The landscape had been shaped. Barriers had been built. Guard towers stood at regular intervals. The planet looked less like a natural place and more like a prison designed for killing. They found a place to land the ship in a hidden valley, using rocks and vegetation as cover. From there, Daniel, Rebecca, and Lucas moved on foot toward the central arena where most of the activity happened. They moved carefully, using scanning equipment to avoid detection. What they found made them stop and stare. The arena was massive. It covered an area the size of a city. Inside, hundreds of creatures of different species were being hunted across open ground. Some were fast. Some were strong. Some tried to fight. Some tried to hide. None of it mattered. The hunters were faster, stronger, better armed, and had no mercy. Around the arena, in elevated stands that looked like a sports stadium, sat wealthy aliens watching the killing as entertainment. They placed bets. They celebrated kills. They cheered when a creature was cornered and destroyed. Some of them were eating and drinking while watching others die. Rebecca covered her mouth. She had seen death before as a doctor, but this was different. This was organized cruelty. This was entertainment built from suffering. Lucas was studying the infrastructure. "They have surveillance everywhere," he said quietly. "Security systems are advanced. Multiple guard stations. I count at least 50 armed Kreth in visible positions, probably more hidden." Daniel made careful recordings. Every image, every sound, every detail of what was happening went into their equipment. This evidence would matter. It would matter later when they tried to tell the story to those who would listen. They spent hours watching. They saw a small furry creature that looked almost peaceful until it was caught by a larger predator. They saw a group of 5 similar beings try to work together, but it did not save them. They saw the Kreth handlers laugh and place additional bets when the creatures showed tactical thinking. The Krath seemed amused that even in facing death, these beings still tried to survive with intelligence. By the time darkness fell, Rebecca was crying. Not openly, but silently. Lucas was angry. Daniel felt something hard building in his chest. "We have to do something," Rebecca said. "Like what?" Lucas asked, but there was no challenge in his voice. He was asking because he was as desperate as they were. Daniel looked at the arena again. Thousands of beings were probably being kept somewhere, waiting for their turn to be hunted. Some were injured. Many were afraid. All of them were doomed if nothing changed. "We cannot stop this directly," Daniel said. "We cannot fight the Krath. We cannot bring in military force. The Council will not help us. But we can gather more information. We can find where they are keeping the others. We can understand how this operation works. And then what?" Lucas asked. Daniel did not have the answer. He only knew that they could not just watch and do nothing. "First, we find out everything," Daniel said. "Then we find a way." Over the next 2 weeks, they mapped the planet. They found the detention facilities where creatures were held before being sent to the arena. They found the control center where Kreth administrators managed the games. They found the transport ships that brought new victims from captured worlds. They found the banks and exchanges where the profits were recorded and divided. They also found something else. Beneath the surface of the planet, there were caves and underground tunnels. The Kreth had not fully explored them. They had dismissed them as useless. But Daniel realized something different. These caves could be something more. They could be a way to hide. They could be refuge. The idea began to form in his mind. It was dangerous and almost certainly impossible. But it was an idea. One night, Daniel sat alone watching the distant lights of the arena. Thousands of creatures would die there. Many of them had done nothing wrong except be born into a universe where the powerful treated the weak as entertainment. He thought about home. He thought about Earth. Humanity was young in the galaxy. Humans were not particularly fast or strong or powerful compared to many other species. But humans had something else. Humans built things. Humans protected each other. Humans chose compassion when they had the power to choose cruelty. Maybe that was what they needed to do here. Maybe they needed to build something on this planet of death. Something that said that there was another way. Daniel presented his plan to Rebecca and Lucas late one night inside their hidden command center. They sat in the dim light of the displays, watching the surveillance feed from the detention facilities below. "We build a sanctuary," Daniel said simply. "Underground. In the caverns we found." Lucas leaned back. "You are talking about saving creatures from an active death game, right in front of an ancient advanced species that controls the entire planet." "Yes," Daniel said. "Impossible," Lucas said. But he did not say no. Rebecca was already moving, looking at the geological scans. "How deep do these caverns go?" "Far," Daniel said. "At least 5 kilometers down, maybe more. The Kreth equipment cannot read through the rock effectively. They did not bother trying." "Water sources?" Rebecca asked. "Multiple underground rivers. Mineral deposits that could support vegetation with the right setup. Thermal vents that could provide power and heat." Lucas started to see it. His engineer's mind was already working through the logistics. If we could access those thermal vents, we could generate power without any external signatures. The planet's natural radiation would hide the heat signatures. "Exactly," Daniel said. Rebecca looked up from the scans. "We would need supplies. Medicine, tools, seed stock, equipment. We cannot carry all of that without the Kreth noticing." "The supply ships," Lucas said. He was thinking now. Really thinking. "They bring creatures in, but they also bring supplies for maintaining the detention centers. Food, equipment, everything they need to keep the game running." "We intercept and redirect," Daniel said. Small amounts. Nothing they would notice. A crate of medical supplies goes missing from one shipment. Some engineering tools from another. Over time, we have what we need. Rebecca stood up. She walked to the window and looked toward the distant arena. You understand that if we do this, if we really do this, there is no going back. The Kreth will hunt us. They will kill us if they catch us. I know, Daniel said. And we can probably only save a fraction of the creatures. Thousands will still die in the arena. I know, Daniel said again. But we have to try anyway, Rebecca said. It was not a question. Over the next month, they began construction of the sanctuary. They moved carefully, using night cycles and avoiding patrol routes. The first challenge was creating an entrance that would not be discovered. They found a small waterfall that served as cover. Behind it, they excavated deeper. The cavern they selected was massive, with high ceilings and flat sections that could be used for living areas. They used stolen equipment to create basic but functional accommodations. Sleeping areas, a medical station, a storage facility, an engineering section where Lucas could maintain their systems. The work was grueling. Rebecca had to be everywhere at once, assessing health needs, treating minor injuries they sustained from working constantly. Lucas worked without sleep, setting up water filtration systems and power generation. Daniel coordinated everything and made constant supply runs stop by the third week. They had the basic structure in place. But they had a serious problem. The sanctuary was empty. Creatures were dying in the arena above, but they did not have access to them. The detention facilities were guarded. The arenas were open killing grounds. There was no safe way to extract. Anyone died until they encountered Kylus. The creature was being transported from the detention facility to the arena when Daniel and Lucas spotted something unusual about one of the delivery vehicles. There was a young Vorthan being moved separately from the others. A Vorthan was a humanoid species, tall and graceful, with skin that shifted colors based on emotion. This one's skin was showing patterns of distress and fear. Daniel made a decision that was dangerous and purely instinctive. He disabled the vehicle systems. It stopped in a remote section of road. The Kreth guards, not understanding what had happened, radioed for assistance. Daniel and Lucas moved quickly, cutting the vehicle open and pulling the Vorthan out. They had maybe 5 minutes before more guards arrived. They ran toward the caverns. Behind them, the Vorthan kept pace. They reached the waterfall and dove behind it. The guards passed without seeing them dot in the sanctuary. The Vorthan stood looking at the cavern, at the humans, and at what they had built. Their skin shifted through colors. Daniel did not understand. Then the creature spoke. "Why did you save me?" Kylus asked. "Because we could," Daniel answered. Kylus looked around at the sanctuary. "You are building something here. A place where you do not have to kill to survive," Rebecca said. Kylus's skin shifted again, something between blue and silver. "I was a hunter once," Kylus said quietly. "I killed. Many times. In the games and before them. But I no longer wish to kill. I no longer wish to take life for the amusement of those who treat death as entertainment." Daniel realized something important. They had not just saved a victim. They had found an ally who understood the arena from the inside. Over the following weeks, Kylus helped them understand how the detention system worked. The Vorthan knew patrol patterns. Kylus knew how the Kreth thought, because Kylus had been part of their system. With this knowledge, Daniel and Rebecca began subtle rescue operations. They could not be obvious, but they could be clever. A creature marked for the arena could sometimes disappear before it reached the killing ground. A guard might forget to check a holding cell properly. An accident might damage transport equipment just enough to require repair time. One by one, creatures began arriving at the sanctuary. a Thraxian with 3 arms who had worked in construction, a small telepathic being called a Whisper who had been studied by the Kreth for potential breeding, a cluster of rock-like entities that communicated through vibrations. Each arrival was a risk. Each one could have exposed them, but each one also proved that Kylus was right. There were beings who did not want to kill, beings who wanted something else, beings who wanted to live. The sanctuary grew. Lucas built more structures. Rebecca established medical protocols. Daniel worked with Kylus to organize the growing population and maintain security. The cavern that had been empty became a home. By the end of the 2nd month, they had saved 47 creatures. They had created a place where the hunted could stop being hunted. They had built something that should not exist in a galaxy of cruelty and profit. But they all knew this was only the beginning. Thousands still died in the arena above. The Kreth still profited. The galaxy still watched and did nothing. Daniel stood in the highest point of the sanctuary, looking at the creatures below who had found refuge. Kylus joined him, the Vorthan's skin shifting to a calm purple color. "How many more will come?" Kylus asked. "As many as we can help," Daniel said. "And then the Kreth will find us, and it will all end." "And you accept this?" Kylus asked. Daniel thought about the arena, about the creatures that had died while he and his team slept, about the entertainment being made from suffering. "Yes," Daniel said. "I accept it." They stood together in the darkness, watching hope grow in a place that should only know despair. The sanctuary was spreading word through the detention facilities in ways Daniel had not expected. A creature would disappear, and the others would wonder where it had gone. Rumors would start. Stories would grow. Word passed through whispered communications, through touch, through the strange alien methods of sharing information that humans did not fully understand. A safe place existed. A place where you did not have to kill. A place where humans, strange as they were, had chosen to help instead of profit. The flow of arrivals increased. Where they had been saving a few creatures per week, now they were bringing in dozens. Kylus became invaluable, understanding which creatures could be extracted safely, which routes would avoid Kreth patrols, which ones were most likely to cause problems if they arrived traumatized and violent. Rebecca worked without rest. The sanctuary's medical station became a place where creatures with injuries learned to heal. Many had been damaged by the arena, cut and bruised and broken. Some carried weapons injuries. Some were sick from the poor conditions in the detention facilities. Rebecca treated them all with the same care she would have given to her own crew. Lucas's engineering work accelerated. The single cavern became multiple chambers. He created sleeping areas for different species. Some creatures needed temperature control. Others needed specific atmospheric conditions. Some required water environments. Lucas built structures that adapted to these needs, working with salvaged materials and stolen equipment. The population of the sanctuary grew to over 200 creatures within 6 weeks. Daniel moved through the growing network like a father watching his children grow. He learned names, though many were sounds or concepts humans could not pronounce properly. He learned their stories. He learned why they had been captured. He learned what they valued and what they feared. But growth brought problems. A creature called Vex, a massive 4-legged predator with claws and teeth built for killing, had been a hunter in the games. Vex had hunted creatures just like the ones now living peacefully in the sanctuary. The tension between Vex and the prey species was immediate and dangerous. Rebecca had to separate them into different cavern sections. But that created conflict over resources. Water lines that should serve both sections became contested. Food supplies that had been shared became sources of argument. The sanctuary, which had been built on the idea of peace, was developing cracks. Lucas tried to expand faster, creating more sections, more separation, more space. But his resources were limited. They could only steal so much from the Kreth, supply ships without triggering investigation. Daniel faced a challenge he had not anticipated. He had created a sanctuary from the chaos above, but he was creating new chaos within his walls. The prey species feared the hunters. The hunters were being asked to do something unnatural. They were being asked to live as vegetarians and peaceful cohabitants when their nature screamed for hunting and killing. One night, conflict erupted. A small dispute over food turned violent. A young herbivore was attacked by one of the predators. Rebecca moved to stop it, and in the chaos, she was struck. She fell hard against the cabin wall, bleeding from a wound on her head. Daniel found her lying still, and something broke in him. For just a moment, he wanted to execute the predator. He wanted to show that killing would not be tolerated, even if it meant killing. But Rebecca opened her eyes and grabbed his wrist. "No," she said, blood running down her face. "This is not what we are building. This is not a place of revenge." The gathered creatures watched as Daniel helped Rebecca to her feet, as he examined her wound, as he checked her concussion carefully. They watched him tend to her without violence. They watched him control his rage and choose something else. Then Kylus did something Daniel had not expected. The Vorthan walked to the predator that had struck Rebecca and looked into its eyes. Kylus spoke to it in a language Daniel did not know, but the meaning was clear. Kylus was judging. Kylus was saying that this was not acceptable. Kylus was speaking for the new laws of this place. The predator bowed its head. Daniel realized something in that moment. The sanctuary could not work if Daniel was alone enforcing the rules. The creatures themselves had to understand what they were building. They had to be part of creating the peace he called a gathering. He stood before all the creatures in the sanctuary and spoke through translation devices that Rebecca had configured. He spoke in simple words and concepts that cross species. "We are here because we rejected killing," Daniel said. "We were captured. We were going to die in the arena above. We came to this place, and humans offered us a choice. A choice to live without hunting, without killing, without becoming monsters for the amusement of monsters." He gestured to the gathered beings. There were creatures of 100 different types. Some had been predators. Some had been prey. All of them had been victims. "But living together is hard," Daniel continued. "We are different. We have different needs. We have different fears. We have different ways. Some of you hunted. Some of you hid. Some of you were brave. Some of you were afraid. But all of you are here now. All of you chose to come here. All of you chose something different." A creature in the back made a sound. It was the small herbivore that had been attacked. The tiny being stepped forward, and its presence created a wave of attention. "I was afraid," the creature said through translated speech. "But this human protected me. This human risked nothing to save me from death." Another creature spoke. Then another. They told stories of being hunted, of being saved, of choosing to believe that peace was possible. By the time Daniel finished, he had understood something. This sanctuary was not his creation. It was theirs. He had built the structure, that they were building the meaning. They were choosing every day to be different. They were choosing to live with creatures that in another context would have eaten them. Over the following weeks, they established rules that worked. Sections of the cavern were reorganized by function rather than species. Hunting predators were given processed food sources that satisfied their nutritional needs without requiring them to hunt. Daniel's team created a council of creatures from different species who met to solve disputes and make decisions together. The sanctuary became something more than a refugee camp. It became a society, an imperfect one, but one built on consent and cooperation, rather than force and dominance. By the end of 3 months, they had saved almost 400 creatures, but the Kreth had not noticed because they were too confident in their control, too confident in the idea that nothing could threaten their operation. They watched the games. They counted the profits. They did not look beneath their feet at the growing civilization of the saved. Daniel stood with Rebecca and Lucas in the highest chamber of the sanctuary. Below them, creatures of impossible diversity worked together to maintain their new home. They carried water. They grew food in hydroponic gardens. They cared for the injured. They taught young ones stories of the worlds they had left behind. How much longer before they find us? Lucas asked. I do not know, Daniel said. But we have proven that this is possible. We have shown that even here, on a planet of death and killing, something beautiful can grow. Rebecca put her hand on his shoulder. And when they find us? Then we defend it, Daniel said. However we can. The sanctuary grew in the darkness, hidden from the killing fields above. It grew stronger every day. It grew more real. It grew into something that would eventually change the galaxy forever. The alert came at 3 in the morning. An automated system detected irregular power signatures beneath the surface of Vex-9. The Crest Security Center registered it as an anomaly and filed a report. It sat in the queue of dozens of maintenance alerts that happened every day on the planet. By chance, a Kreth engineer named Shardik noticed the report. Shardik was unusual for a Kreth. He actually did maintenance work himself instead of delegating to lesser creatures. When he saw the power signature, he decided to investigate. Shardik sent a small team with sensors designed to penetrate rock. They descended into the caverns and immediately detected the heat signatures. Massive heat sources that had not been there 6 months ago. Heat sources that were too organized, too structured to be natural. The Kreth engineer made the call that changed everything. He reported directly to Kreth Command that there was an unauthorized facility operating beneath the game arenas. The Kreth leadership assembled immediately. They knew they had an exclusive operation. They knew every facility, every structure, every system they had created on Vex-9. An unauthorized facility could only mean one thing. A rival organization was building something underneath the games. Someone was trying to sabotage their operation. Kreth Command issued emergency protocols. All security forces were put on high alert. They descended into the caverns with weapons, armor, and the kind of equipment that had conquered 1,000 worlds. They expected to find a rival Kreth faction, or perhaps an alliance of lesser species, trying to challenge their control. What they found was far more disturbing. Alarms started screaming through the sanctuary. Daniel was in the water treatment section when he heard them. He ran toward the command center, where Lucas had set up their communication and surveillance systems. Multiple Kreth enforcement units entering the caverns from the north entrance. Lucas reported. At least 50 armed personnel, maybe more. Heavy weapons. Daniel felt his chest tighten. This was the moment he had known would come. But he had not expected it to arrive so soon. He had thought they had more time. Rebecca appeared, already moving toward the medical section. How long until they reach us? 20 minutes if they move directly, Lucas said. Maybe 30 if they clear the tunnels first for obstacles. Daniel activated the sanctuary's communication system. Every creature in the network could hear his voice. The Kreth have discovered us, Daniel said, his voice steady. They are coming down. Everyone moved to the secondary caverns. Follow the marked paths. Help each other. Move now. The sanctuary erupted into controlled chaos. Creatures that had learned to trust each other began moving, helping the wounded, carrying the young, moving deeper underground. Rebecca directed medical personnel to secure supplies and instruments. Lucas began running through his checklist of defensive preparations, but defending against Kreth forces was almost futile. They had armor that could withstand weapons fire. They had scanners that could track movement. They had numbers and discipline and training in warfare that no refuge camp could match. Daniel moved to where the primary tunnel entrance was located. Kylus was already there, along with some of the stronger creatures that had volunteered to help defend. "You do not have to fight," Daniel told Kylus. "You were a hunter once. You know what they can do." Kylus looked at the human with eyes that had seen countless arenas. "I know, but I also know what that place above does to you. It turns you into something that profits from pain. That stops today." The first Kreth unit appeared around the corner, weapons raised, armor gleaming in the emergency lighting. The moment Daniel had feared and anticipated had arrived. What happened next was not a battle. It was the collision between two different ways of being. The creatures of the sanctuary did not try to match the Kreth in firepower. They could not. Instead, they did something that the Kreth had not experienced. They showed them what they had built. A small creature without weapons stepped forward. It was a child, a young thing born in the detention facilities and brought to the sanctuary just weeks before. The child had been scheduled for the arena, marked for death. Doomed from birth, the child stood before the Kreth enforcer and did something that made the soldier pause. The child placed a hand on the Kreth's armor and made a sound. Not a threat. Not an attack. Just a question. The Kreth soldier did not fire. The moment stretched. Then Kylus, the reformed hunter, moved into the space between. "We are not fighters," Kylus said in the Kreth language. "We are the ones your operation leaves behind. The creatures that are too slow, too weak, too broken to be entertaining. We came here because someone offered us a choice." Behind the enforcer, more Kreth arrived. They raised weapons. They prepared to clear the cavern of obstruction and complete their investigation. But Lucas had been busy. The engineer had prepared one final system. He activated it. The thermal generators that had been providing power for the sanctuary suddenly released their accumulated heat in a controlled burst. The cavern filled with steam and boiling water. Not enough to kill the armored Kreth, but enough to force them back, to confuse their sensors, to create chaos. In that chaos, Kylus led the creatures deeper. Daniel ran with them. Rebecca helped the wounded keep moving. Lucas made sure the thermal system did not cause a catastrophic failure that would trap everyone. The Kreth pursued, but they had to move carefully in the superheated environment. They had to navigate through a network of tunnels they did not understand, in a place that was home to creatures who knew every passage. The chase went deeper into the planet. The sanctuary was lost. The structures and the homes they had built would be discovered and destroyed. But the creatures were escaping. The people were getting away. Daniel found himself running through darkness with Lucas beside him. Behind them, the sounds of Kreth pursuit echoed off stone walls. "They will hunt us," Lucas said. "Yes," Daniel said. "They will kill us." Lucas continued. "Probably," Daniel agreed. But Daniel's mind was already working ahead. The Kreth had discovered the sanctuary, but they had not captured it. The creatures had escaped. The story was still being written. He made a decision in that moment that would change everything. They could run. They could hide deeper. They could try to survive in the caverns and hope the Kreth eventually gave up, or they could fight back in a different way. Daniel slowed his pace and grabbed Lucas. "Rebecca," he called. "Where are you?" Rebecca appeared through the darkness, covered in thermal mist and dust. "What do you need?" "I need you to keep everyone moving toward the lower caverns," Daniel said. "Keep them safe. What are you going to do?" Rebecca asked. "Something crazy," Daniel said. He was already moving back toward the pursuing Kreth, toward the heat and the chaos and the danger. Lucas grabbed his arm. "If you go back, you will die." "Probably," Daniel said. But that is the point. The Kreth had come to the sanctuary to destroy it. They had expected resistance from primitive creatures. They had expected easy victory. What they were getting instead was something that made no sense to them. Daniel Hayes, a human, moved toward them alone. Daniel had known that the sanctuary could not stay hidden forever, but he had not planned for discovery to come while he still had the evidence. The recordings they had made of the Kreth operations, the arena games, the detention facilities, the profits and the deaths, all of it, was stored in Lucas's portable system. As the Kreth forces chased deeper through the caverns, Daniel made a choice that terrified and liberated him at the same time. He ordered Lucas to send the recordings out, all of them, broadcast across every galactic communication network that humans had access to. Lucas was in the cavern section that the Kreth had not yet reached. His hands shook as he uploaded the first files. Video of the arena, images of creatures being hunted, footage of the Kreth administrators placing bets on which creature would die first, audio recordings of wealthy aliens paying premium prices to watch suffering. The broadcast began spreading almost immediately. The data moved through quantum relays, through Ansible networks, across light years of space in microseconds. The Kreth controlled much of galactic communication infrastructure, but they did not control all of it. Humans did not have the most power or the most resources, but they had access. They had contacts. They had friends in unexpected places. By the time the first file had fully transferred to public networks, 1,000 more had already been downloaded and reshared. By the time the Kreth realized what was happening, it was too late to stop it. The galaxy watched. They watched creatures that looked intelligent, that showed personality and emotion and the will to survive, being hunted for entertainment. They watched predators that had no choice but to hunt or starve. They watched young ones that had done nothing except be born into a cosmos of cruelty. They watched the Kreth laugh while creatures died. They watched the betting. They watched the prices. More footage appeared in the broadcasts. Recordings that Rebecca had made of creatures in the detention facility explaining their lives. Stories of abduction from peaceful worlds. Stories of being separated from families. Stories of being told they were going to die for profit. And then the most important images came. Images of the sanctuary, of creatures working together across species lines, of humans who had risked everything to offer an alternative, of a small child with a hand on a Kreth enforcer's armor, asking for peace instead of offering violence. The broadcasts reached Earth. Humans who had never thought about Vex 9 or the Kreth or the games now understood. They understood that humans in the galaxy were not weak or insignificant. Humans had built a place of refuge. Humans had chosen compassion. Humans had risked death to oppose organized cruelty. The broadcast reached the progressive species. The younger civilizations that were still building their values found inspiration in what they saw. The ethereals, the variants, the collective mind species that had been pushing for reform in the Galactic Council found their argument suddenly given weight and power. The broadcast reached even the old species, the ancient powers that had been complicit in the games. Some of them felt shame. Some of them felt fear. All of them felt the sudden change in the political landscape. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session. The conservative powers, the species that profited from the Kreth operation, tried to suppress the broadcasts. But they could not. The information was already everywhere. The images were burned into the consciousness of 1,000 civilizations. Burned into the consciousness of 1,000 civilizations. Of 1,000 civilizations. Young Varian representatives stood before the council and called for intervention. The ethereals demanded immediate action. Species that had been quiet for centuries found their voices. The Kreth operation on Vex 9 could no longer be ignored or tolerated. But the broadcasts had done more than create political pressure. They had made Daniel Hayes, the human who had ordered the release, a symbol. News agencies across the galaxy were reporting his name. Humans were being recognized as something more than primitive newcomers. Humans were being seen as the species that had opened a place even monsters feared to enter. Back in the caverns, Daniel was bleeding. A Kreth energy weapon had caught him in the shoulder as he fought his way back toward Rebecca and the evacuating creatures. The wound burned. His arm did not respond properly, but he kept moving. Rebecca found him and immediately began medical work. She used what supplies she had, field dressing that could only be temporary. Her hands were shaking, but her voice stayed calm. "You are insane," she said. "Probably," Daniel agreed. "We are going to die down here," Rebecca said, sealing the wound with emergency gel. "We might," Daniel said. "But by now, the broadcasts should be spreading." Rebecca understood immediately. Her eyes widened. "You uploaded them?" "Lucas did. Everything. Every image, every record, every moment of what the Kreth has done." Rebecca looked up toward the ceiling, as if she could see through the stone to the galaxy beyond. For a moment, she smiled, despite the danger, despite the wound, despite the Kreth forces still pursuing them. "Then maybe it was worth it," Rebecca said. "The Kreth hunters were not aware of the broadcast yet, but they would be soon. They would discover that their precious operation had been exposed to the entire galaxy. They would understand that something had changed fundamentally. For now, they continued pursuing. Kylus led the creatures through passages that only the sanctuary residents knew. The network twisted and turned through the planetary rock. Some Kreth units were separated and lost. Some ran into dead ends. The organized military advantage that the Kreth had maintained on the surface was useless in the depths. 4 hours after the chase began, Kylus led the remaining creatures to a vast underground sea. It was a natural cavern so large it felt like another world. Water stretched into darkness. Bioluminescent creatures drifted in the depths, making the water glow with soft light. The creatures gathered on the shoreline. Daniel counted them. Nearly 300. Not everyone had made it. Some had been captured. Some had been injured and could not run. Some had chosen to try to delay the Kreth to give others time to escape. But 300 had survived. Daniel sat by the water's edge, with Rebecca treating his shoulder properly now that they had a moment. Lucas was checking their remaining equipment. Kylus stood looking out at the underground sea. The Vorthan's skin shifting through colors that Daniel had learned meant sadness and determination mixed together. "We lost the sanctuary," Lucas said. "Yes," Daniel said. "We lost everything we built." Rebecca added. "Yes," Daniel said again. "But we won," Kylus said. The Vorthan turned to look at them. "We won because the whole galaxy now knows what we built. They know what humans chose to do. They know that even on a planet of death, life found a way. They know that refusing to kill is a form of strength." Daniel realized Kylus was right. They had lost the physical sanctuary, but the idea had escaped. The concept of refusing to participate in cruelty, of choosing mercy, even when mercy cost everything, had spread across the galaxy. The first transmission arrived 6 hours later. A message through the emergency channels that even the Kreth could not fully suppress. The Galactic Council was sending forces. The Kreth operation was being shut down. Vex 9 was being placed under Council authority. More messages came. From Earth, from human colonies, from species that wanted to help, from creatures around the galaxy who had watched the broadcasts and decided that they could not look away anymore. Daniel held Rebecca's hand as they waited in the depths. They had given everything. They had opened a place of sanctuary on a planet of killing. They had shown the galaxy that humans, small and new as they were, could stand against cruelty, the Kreth would face consequences. The games would end. The thousands of creatures still trapped above would be freed. But for Daniel, all he could think about was the creatures beside him in the darkness, the ones they had managed to save. The ones who would live to see a galaxy that was different because of what they had chosen to do. The broadcast had changed everything. The Coalition forces arrived at Vex 9 7 days later. They came from 20 different worlds. They came with military power, yes, but also with rescue teams and medical personnel and administrators who understood how to shut down complex operations. The Kreth, faced with isolation, economic sanctions, and the attention of the entire galaxy, chose not to fight. The arenas went silent. The games ended. The Kreth leadership surrendered to face Galactic Council judgment. The detention facilities were opened. The creatures trapped inside were freed. Many were injured. Many were traumatized. Many did not understand what freedom meant anymore. But they were alive. Daniel, Rebecca, Lucas, and Kylus emerged from the underground caverns with their 300 saved creatures to find a transformed world. The sky above was no longer filled with profit-taking predators and entertainment seekers. It was filled with rescue ships and medical vessels. Rebecca went immediately to work with the new medical teams, coordinating care for the thousands of creatures freed from the detention facilities. She became the voice that helped the rescuers understand the specific needs of different species. She shared everything she had learned about treating trauma and rebuilding shattered beings. Lucas worked with the Coalition engineers to establish a permanent rehabilitation center on Vex 9. Instead of arenas for killing, they would build spaces for healing. Instead of detention facilities, they would create places where creatures could recover and understand that they were no longer property or entertainment. Kylus took on a different role. The reformed hunter became a counselor and guide for the other creatures that had been caught in the games. Kylus understood predators and prey because Kylus had been both. The Vorthan helped the hunters understand that they could live without killing. Kylus showed them that choosing not to hunt was not weakness. It was the hardest choice there was. Daniel found himself in unexpected conversations with Galactic Council administrators. They wanted to understand how he had organized the sanctuary. They wanted to know how creatures from hostile species could learn to live together. They wanted to understand how a human, a species the Council had considered insignificant, had changed the political landscape of the galaxy. Daniel tried to explain that it was simple. When you were faced with suffering and you had the power to reduce it, you did. You did not calculate the odds. You did not wait for permission. You built what needed to exist. The charges against Daniel were eventually dropped. The Council understood that he had violated protocol, broken agreements, and acted without authorization. But he had also exposed a massive atrocity and forced the Council to act. The political calculation favored letting him live. More than that, Daniel became something unexpected. He became a symbol of what humans could be in the galaxy. Not weak, not expendable, but moral. Humans were the species that had opened a place where even monsters feared to enter. Humans had chosen compassion when they had nothing to gain from it. 3 months after the liberation, VEX 9 was transformed. The arena grounds were being dismantled. The detention facilities were being converted into housing and healing centers. The control center that had managed the games became a memorial to the creatures who had died, and an archive of what had happened here, so that future generations would remember and never allow it to happen again. The sanctuary caverns were expanded. What had been hidden and desperate became official and supported. The creatures that Daniel and his team had saved became the foundation of a new society. They became the guides and teachers for the thousands of others who were learning to live without being hunted. Daniel stood at the mouth of the original sanctuary cavern where it all had started. He watched creatures of different species working together. He watched a small prey creature teaching a former predator how to cultivate food from hydroponic gardens. He watched two enemy species from distant worlds moving water barrels together. Their earlier enmity forgotten in favor of shared survival. Kyle is joined him. The Vorthan's skin showing the calm purple color that meant contentment. The galaxy has changed, Kyla said. In some ways, Daniel said. He was careful not to overstate what they had accomplished. The galaxy still had cruelty. There were still systems of exploitation. There were still species that preyed on the weak. VEX-9 was one sanctuary, not a solution to every problem. But they know it can be different, Kyla said. That is important. They know because humans showed them. Rebecca walked up to them, her medical uniform still stained from her work in the healing center. We lost 16 creatures last week. Injuries were too severe. But we saved 843 from untreatable conditions. 843 people who would have died in that arena or in those detention cells. Numbers had meaning now. Each one represented a life. Each one represented someone who would wake up tomorrow and choose not to kill, would work alongside their former enemies, would help build something new. Lucas came next, wiping sweat from his forehead. The new main cavern is functional. We can house 5,000 creatures now if we optimize the space. More than that if we finish the secondary expansion. Daniel looked at the three of them. They had arrived at VEX-9 as observers. They had become builders. They had become the humans who refused to look away. The Galactic Council offered them positions. They wanted Daniel to head the rehabilitation effort for VEX-9. They wanted Rebecca to develop medical protocols for treating crisis survivors across the galaxy. They wanted Lucas to establish engineering standards for sanctuary, facilities on other worlds. All three of them accepted, but the work they had started was not about them. It was about the creatures that had survived. It was about the galaxy understanding that it could be different. In the Memorial Center, Daniel spent time with the families of creatures who had died in the games. He listened to their stories. A Thraxian mother who had lost her 5 children. A telepathic whisperer whose entire network of connected minds had been destroyed. A rock entity cluster that had lost half of itself to the arena. These were the ones who Daniel could not save. These were the ones who haunted him, but they told him something important. They told him that because he had tried, because humans had tried, it meant something. It meant their children's deaths were not meaningless entertainment. It meant someone stood against the cruelty. It meant the galaxy was changing, slowly, reluctantly, but genuinely. A young creature that had been born in the sanctuary came to find Daniel one day. The young one was the offspring of 2 different species, something that should have been impossible or at least monstrous by old Kreth standards. But in the sanctuary, new life had been born in peace. Thank you, the young creature said with words it had learned from humans. Daniel knelt down to look the creature in the eyes. You are welcome, but you do not need to thank me. You need to remember. Remember what happened here. Remember what we built. Remember that you chose life instead of death. That is what matters. At night, Daniel sometimes climbed to the highest point of the sanctuary and looked up at the stars. He thought about Earth. He thought about the message he would send to the human colonies, explaining what had happened here. He thought about how that message would spread, how it would define what humans were in the minds of the galaxy. Humans were the species that built sanctuaries in darkness. Humans were the species that chose mercy when they had nothing to gain from it. Humans were the species that opened a place even monsters feared to enter, because that place was built on principles stronger than weapons, or technology, or superior physical power. The victory was not complete. The galaxy was not healed. But on VEX-9, on a planet that had been transformed into a machine of death and suffering, something had survived. Something had grown. Something had changed the calculation of what was possible. 3 months turned into 6 months. 6 months turned into a year. The Kreth who had run the games faced trial and execution. The species that had profited from the games faced sanctions and restrictions. The Galactic Council implemented new laws against the exploitation of sentient beings for entertainment. It was not perfect. It was not enough. But it was movement. It was change. Daniel worked in the rehabilitation center, helping creatures understand that they were safe. Rebecca trained a new generation of medical professionals. Lucas designed more sanctuaries on other worlds. Kylus continued to guide reformed hunters and traumatized prey toward a new way of living. The creatures of the sanctuary thrived. Population grew. Children were born and raised in safety. Gardens produced food. Water flowed clean. Life continued in the darkness beneath the killing fields. And above, on the surface of X9, where the arenas had been, memorials were built. The names of the creatures who had died were carved into stone. Not forgotten, not erased. Remembered forever as a testament to what the galaxy would not tolerate anymore. On the 1-year anniversary of the liberation, Daniel stood in the memorial center with Rebecca, Lucas, and Kylus. They stood before a plaque that had been carved by the creatures of the sanctuary themselves. It read simply, "In this place, monsters discovered that they were not the strongest. Compassion was. In this place, creatures learned that life could be chosen over death. In this place, humans opened a sanctuary where even the galaxy's darkness could not reach. Here, we remember.